Right, here we are on September 25th, 2025. I've asked my dad to talk about his parents, Marion and Edith. Some favorite pictures, and here's a couple picture of them my dad's holding. That's a fun picture. I remember that time.
That's probably the way you remember them.
Yeah.
I think.
We're in my dad's den in Idaho, and see the raspberry bushes out the window with the ponds.
I see a pink one right there.
Yeah.
A white one, we call them. White raspberry. They're excellent. We really enjoyed having those.
I'd love to just, how they met and maybe their education and employment and their home a little bit.
Well, they grew up in Melba, Idaho. Because their parents had immigrated from Germany, and they had come through places, but they ended up in Melba homesteading. And that was a tough homestead. They had to clear the sagebrush, and they projected that they would live there actually before the New York Canal got irrigation water in it. Uncle Tad talks about some of the sagebrush growing as tall as 8 feet tall. And then there was a big fire that went through, and they said it's never grown that way. Now, at our old house, where we sprinkled, that sagebrush would go 8 feet tall. And it was a source of essentially lumber for them. Dad talked about they would rail it. They would get a piece of rail from the railroad, tie a horse on each end of it, and they would knock it down with the rail, and they would go by and grub it up. And they used that sagebrush for decoration, for Christmas trees, for heating, for whatever.
It was a fuel source.
It was a fuel source.
Wow.
That's what they had.
That's a tough fuel source.
Right. And those were days of basically, Dad talks about a lot of rabbits. He lived in a lot. He had a brother, and he was a different type of person. Dad was the provider. He was the hunter, and Dad provided a lot of pheasants, a lot of rabbits, and was good at it. Uncle Harold would take the dog out after the dog set about the second pheasant and he missed it. He'd turn around and go. The dog would leave him. He wouldn't stay with him. Went back to the house because they would always go with Dad. He'd like to go with him, but they grew up in Melba. Mother, as I understand, was only about a year old when her father died. Jean hadn't been born yet.
Wow.
And he drank the ditch water when it came into the big canal. Got typhoid fever and didn't live it.
Wow.
And
how old was he?
Well,
in his 30s, right?
Some of his 30s, something like that. Yeah,
wow.
young. Like I say, because her mother was about a year old, and she had an older sister, Vi, and she had a brother, Irwin, and Tad that was older, and one more, Clarence. And just shortly after that, Clarence was found dead down along the Snake River. And the neighbor came in and told him he'd fallen down the rocks there. They found looked like a 22 shot behind his ear there. They never did figure out what that was, because it wasn't evaluated in those days, but he was always a little jealous of Clarence. So with a very young family, they learned how to work, and they raised their crops, carefully paid their tithing in kind, because whatever they had is what they did. And many times they had a skip school to help take care of the farm, raise what they had. As a mother knew, she was a popular girls' school. They didn't attend all the time because just barely enough to get a degree, I guess. So kind of it was between when they needed them at home or because there wasn't a father. And Grandma's I remarried later, but that's well after the kids had grown. They didn't know that. My mother talked about being really liking nice things, and she took a job helping pretty much living in the house of a doctor there. She did his washing to his shirts, cleaning, things of that nature.
Edith did?
Edith did.
How old was she doing that?
Well, she was probably late teenager, 20s. She talks about doing it so her brother Irwin could go on a mission. He supported with her. For her work with the family. There wasn't a lot of cash inflow in those days.
Where did Irwin go?
Somewhere in the States.
Okay.
And Tad went up around Minnesota. he was actually asked to harvest an elk for the family when he was up on his mission. And he
Perfect,
knew
'cause I don't know how to do that.
So he did it. So mother was one of the girls at school. She played a little bit of basketball. They did have, I was surprised they had some basketball. So. Because that's where they met, was at school.
Melba High School.
Melba High School. And Dad was, he was the star athlete. He was the quarterback.
And the pitcher, right?
He was the pitcher. He hit the many home runs. They still claim that he has that the Longhorn as much as the guys that went to the pro. There's a guy called Coleman, famous that went to the pro. And it was not too long ago that Brent was up in the military thing, attending seeing a post military guy that had been injured at the military hospital, and he said, you know, I caught that game that your dad, Marion, he said, pitched and won the state tournament. They beat high school and beat Boise. They didn't believe us. They went and looked it up, and there it was in the paper. They found it.
The state champions.
Yeah.
Melba High.
That was the pitcher, and they barely had enough people to make a team. But anyway, he was kind of the star athlete, and that's how he and Mother kind of got to know each other. And they kind of went together for 6-8 years. And Dad got introduced to the church through Irwin and Tad. Dad would hung. He lived on one side of the high school, which is probably about a mile away. And they would walk or ride a horse to school. And Mother and the Desires lived on the other side of the school. And they would come the other way. It was an old Glendale school, they called it. They went to. I've actually been there a time or two. It was gone now, but I went with Kenny when he was alive. And then I was about 12 then. Well, then once that the Mother and Dad liked each other a lot, I guess they did. I guess they were so busy they worked hard. Both of them. They knew what hard work was. And I can remember Dad would come out with help us when we used to harvest potatoes. They would actually let school out when I was a kid to harvest the potatoes. Bill Digger would go through and lay them on the ground, and then the job was to go through and you put them in a bucket, take 2 buckets with a gunny sack, and you'd leave the gunny sacks along the way, and then they would come pick the gunny sack, put them in a railroad boxcar, and off they'd go. And Dad said that he and Irvin Tad one day loaded a whole boxcar with gunny sacks, all by hand. And of course, all the hay was put up along in those days. They would cut it, and then they had to go through 2 different ways, making rolls out of it, and then with a pitchfork, it's put on a slip, taken over the derrick. And as a kid, I liked to do that part of it, because Kenny would take one derrick or one slip, and I'd take the other one. We just drive down through, and the guys with a pitchfork would load the hay, and then we'd drive underneath the derrick. The derrick's that big long pole that goes up. And
yeah.
They down the chain would come down, and it was our job. We had a little chain on each side, and on the set of chains, and the hay would be on this, and we would take those chains and hook together on the hook, and they would take that whole load up, swing it over, and the person whoever was at their place would trigger that to say where he wanted it. And the clue was to build a stack that wouldn't fall down. Sometimes Dad said I did never build a stack that fell down.
Wow.
And they helped each other. They moved from one place to the next place, and they from the haying teams.
Wow.
Then they played a lot of it. So Dad kind of ended up going to church a little bit just to go with Irwin and Tad for anything else. And Mother talked about the time that when she first met Dad, he had come down with Irwin to go goose hunting the next morning. And she met him first. I guess that she must have known him at school, but she said, why do you bring that kid down here and see how poor we are? And his reply was, well, oh gosh, let's see how poor they are, referring to Dad's place.
Yeah.
A little one-line place and a one-room house. And they had for water, they had dug a cistern. And before Dad passed away, he showed me that and took him out. And they dig a hole in the ground, and they would line it with some kind of like a cement. And then when one man would come by with a horse-drawn tank, that's where the potable water was. Once they had it, they would buy that water, and it was used for everything: drinking, washing, bathing, you name it. And when it got low, they would order another loader.
Wow.
Load. And they had a lot sell chickens, but they kind of knew each other through school. They would go to church, and Dad attended church. I saw a clipping, somebody sent me a clipping about a year ago that said, there's a kid, the Coleman kid come to church with him and said he's never been baptized, but he seems to be the same kind of kid that those kids were. So he buddied up with the Irish, is what it amounted to. And then they talked about getting married, and Mother said, no, I want to be married in a temple. Dad wasn't a member, and he went away to a business school. In fact, his fathers were not happy with him dating Mother or liking Mother. In fact, the day came, and his dad said he made arrangements to go to some little business school, I think up in Seattle, I'm not sure where it was. He went up there and kind of washed dishes and cleaned up the kitchens for his meals. But before he left, his father told Dad, he said, I suppose you're going to go see that Mormon girl again. He said, yeah, Dad, I am. He said, well, if you are, just don't come back. And apparently he softened a few years later on that, but he and Grandma Coleman did not care for Mother or anyone that had to do with the church.
That's Grandmother Roth, right?
That was Mother Roth.
Yeah, I used to visit her.
She was much more temperamental than Grandpa Roth was. And I only met him one time. He had been injured. A bull got him in the pen, and he kind of rolled his way underneath the fence and got away from it, injured his back. He never was the same. I only seen him once that I ever remembered as a kid.
Wow.
And but Dad went to school there and ended up taking the missionary missions and joined the church.
It's amazing.
And came home and there was Mother, and Mother, I guess they talk about her having a bit of a wild thing. She was going with a guy that wore the leather jacket and a motorcycle. And they go riding. But they got together and said, well, we ought to get married. And Dad said, no, it'll take me a year. I can't go to the temple for a year. So they waited. So they probably dated and knew each other off and on for 68 years.
Wow.
Before they finally got married. And they did. Dad was known as a hard worker. He worked hard, and they got various jobs. Of course, they didn't have any money. Remember, something like that, $13 or $17 when they got married. And I know one of the first places they married, or they rented, was in Nampa, just across the street on a little, from the old Albertsons. The Albertsons is still there, right across the street to the south on 12th Avenue. Two-story building. I remember him saying it was so cold that time that he asked if they could just cut a little hole in the ceiling, in the wall, in the floor, so that the heat from the one single wood stove would run up through there, so it'd be not quite so cold in the winter.
Wow.
And Dad was a good worker. He got into the lumber business. He did very well in what he did. Some various moves with the Payette lumber yard. Kind of talked to the man guy and said, I really should have part of the profit that you get from here. And he said, I can't do that to you because I got too many stores. He said, well, then I guess I'll have to go to my own. So then he left and went on his own lumber yard. I think it was 1946. And to build a very, very rugged place. I remember the union was trying to get them, all of his workers. He got up to around 1,250 workers. They wanted to join it, and they all voted no. Said Marion treats us so fair that we won't. And here about 2 years ago, Reed and I ran into one of the salesmen that was there, and I said, can you give me one word that describes your father? He said, honest. He was honest in everything he did.
That's a good word.
And that was something that Dad was. And I can remember when he had a competing lumber yard just down in McClellan, was his name, and McClellan was called to be the state president. And he called Dad and said, he wanted Dad to be his counselor. And Dad said, you do things so scrupulous in your business that I don't agree with what you do things. He would kind of go behind the scene, and he didn't ever give in detail, but it wasn't up front.
Hmm.
And he said, I don't feel comfortable being your company. He said, if I stop doing that, will you be the counselor? And he said, yes. So he ended up being his counselor, and they had regular businesses with no behind the back stuff after that.
Wow.
Like I say, mother worked hard there. She's she did a lot of. She was known to iron and wash and iron shirts and things for the doctor and keep the house. And she ran a tight ship. I said that probably did the best we got at home. I don't know what else to tell you about mom and dad. Dad ended up, I know, mother was very supportive of dad. Mother, they asked dad to run the legislature one time. He was the bishop at the time. Of course, was elected to go to the legislature.
The House of Representatives, right? Yeah, here in Idaho.
And that was really rare because they'd been Democratic for years, and it was the first time two Republicans had ever won.
Hmm.
And the Democratic senator came and told us that if he runs, she said, I won't run anymore. You just know more about it. But it was a challenge to try to drive from Pocatello to Boise and to be the bishop and have a family to take care of and a lumber yard.
Yeah.
So he loved to fly fish. In those days, I tied my flies and would provide dad with them, and we'd go fly fishing. Just 2-3 hours, we'd be good at it.
I remember, so they had their first house in, well, they rented in Nampa, but then they got to Pocatello. That's where they did the lumberyard, right?
I went to the lumber yard.
But didn't they build like a whole bunch of Coleman homes?
I think, as I remembered, I lived in 19 different homes in 21 years.
Because you'd build a home, finish it, sell it, and build another home.
He built a house. Mother was a master at painting and decorating. I mean, she talked about every coat of varnish in her kitchen had to have 7 coats of varnish with a camel hair brush.
Wow.
That's my word, I was saying. Very particular. I don't ever remember a house being advertised for sale. Somebody would walk in and see it and give them an offer, and we were gone. We just kept moving around different places.
Wow.
Now, the first thing I remember earlier was Dad played baseball, and he was good. From what I understand, he turned down an offer to play for the St. Louis Cardinals. He was a good pitcher, and he could hit a long ball. Didn't run very fast. We used to always joke he had hit a long ways to get to second base. And Dean Lehman could run around the time that'd take Dad to get to second base. But they had a softball team, and with those guys, they won a lot of games.
Was it fastball? Was it hardball?
Softball.
It was softball.
Well, Dad played softball in high school, and then there
Was it underhand pitch? Or are we talking baseball, like Major League Baseball?
When he was playing regular pitching hardball, and then during the war, all the lower teams were stopped, and so we just had a little local team locally that played over at Howell Park, and Dad was the playing manager for that team.
Oh, okay.
And they had a team in Idaho, somewhere in Montana.
And he
Idaho
pitched,
Falls,
right?
Boise. And he managed the team, and would he play shortstop or pitch if he needed.
That was essentially minor league baseball.
Minor league baseball.
But that was hardball, right?
Hardball.
Yeah.
That was hardball.
Yeah.
Then he would play on the ward teams on the softball.
Yeah.
And he was big in putting together community projects. He's the one that put the lights on the field. He would provide the trucks for we always had a big parade on the 4th of July, the 24th of July. It was big in community. In fact, he was given an honorary I remember a big, beautiful headdress like the chief of the Indians would get when they honored him as being chief of the law.
When your dad retired, where did he retire from, and where'd they go?
Well, it came to the point, the day I left for my mission, Dad asked me if I would like to lumber, and it was an excellent lumber yard. It was voted the best in the Northwest. And I told Dad, I said, I would like to do something else, Dad. Because he'd had someone try to buy it for 2-3 years. He said, well, I guess I'll sell it lumber yard. He sold it to the Boise Cascade. And as an example of that, something Berger was his name, came in. They said, usually when they do something, they'll have an audit. And he said, you don't need to audit this lumber yard. If Marion says it's there, it's there.
Yeah.
And
that integrity.
And they didn't do an audit, and he just sold the lumber yard and Dad moved on into Boise to take over their prefab housing. That's the first they started building prefab houses here in Boise.
Hmm.
So the first ones they had were, they built a bunch of prefabs out, and up in a little fishing where I used to go filling in.
That's like how they prefab the walls and stuff, but they still build a single family home with it, right?
They put it together in a day. They could have closed in one day once they have it fixed.
But it was a home with a foundation, not a mobile
They
home.
had to have a foundation in, and then they
So
would come
prefab.
in. They had the walls all put together with everything on it except just put up the walls and hook up
The wiring. Wow.
The wiring is already put in the walls, everything.
Wow.
Prefab.
Wow.
And he developed a lot of that.
Did a lot of that with Boise Cascade.
He did a lot of that with Boise Cascade.
And do you know how old he was when he retired? I don't know.
You know, he was asked to go and be a mission president, and I think that's.
Oh, that's right, in California.
He went down to
That was like 69 to 72 or
he didn't ever work again.
68 to 71 or something like that.
Yeah, and he sold the lumberyard prior to that after I went on a mission.
I was at the Taylorsville Temple doing initiatories, and a man that was there saw my name Coleman and said, "That was the name of my mission president."
Was it?
And I said, "Were you in California back in like 69, 70? He goes, "Yes." I go, "That's my grandfather, Marion Coleman." He goes, "Yes, Marion Coleman was my mission president." I saw that man like
Interesting.
maybe 2 months ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What else can I say? Mom and Dad were, you know, Dad was very tolerant of Mother. She was kind of demanding, and as she got a little older, she's even more demanding.
I remember her calling Marion, Marion.
She liked clothes, and she would order clothes out of the catalogs, and Dad had to take them always back to mail them back in when she didn't like them. And
I remember when they lived on the golf course up at an Eagle, on Eagle Hills.
he loved to play golf.
Yeah, they're fun. I got to golf with them a few times. That was nice.
Was it?
Yeah.
He was always afraid to get a hole in one because if he did, he'd have to buy liquor at the store.
Everybody drinks.
Didn't ever get one. Didn't buy drinks. But
Well,
he enjoyed that part of his life. He was a good hunter. My gosh, he was a good hunter. He helped me as I went out as a young time. And we used to say, everybody else shoots and then Coleman hits it. I mean, he shoots last. We go pheasant hunting.
Boom, boom, boom. He'd drop it.
I've been out with him more than once. And one time, I went out to him. I left med school to come in to spend a day hunting, and he met me in Pocatello. And we went out. And I mean, one day, it was a musty day, and he said, "I can smell the deer, Wayne." And he said, "Get ready." And he walked up to it almost, and he jumped it up and came right by me, and I shot it, and we took it down to the neighbor there.
Wow.
And but he was a good shot with the 30-30. I mean, you didn't want to challenge him because you would lose.
And that was an open sight.
Open sights.
30-30.
30-30.
Like you see in the old Western movies. Yeah.
And
they served in the temple too, right?
He just was a great shot. But Mother really ran a tight house and would challenge some things a little bit. You know, she was German, and she was great. But they had their challenges toward the end of their life. And I remember one time, Mother was kind of demanding, and Dad, I finally made a list of the things she wanted him to do. And then he walked out with that list and he said, "Now, Benno," they called her Benno Pino. I said, I'll help you do the things you want, but tell me which one you want to do first." And she got mad about that. She didn't like that. But anyway, she wanted to live to make it to 80, but she didn't make it.
79.
So I did 79. And
They worked in the temple, didn't they?
yes.
But
Boise Temple first opened, they were stalwarts there.
right then in like 84, right?
Would be about right.
Something like that.
Dad had been interviewed to become a sealer.
Hmm.
And they were, in those days, they waited for the general authority to come to town to either reorganize a stake or something like that, or else you had to go to Salt Lake.
Hmm.
And I don't know why. I remember who it was. Who's the one that had to have surgery on his throat?
Spencer W. Kimball.
Yeah. I think he was scheduled to come in as the general authority to organize the stake, and he was supposed to interview Dad and give the calling. He'd had the interviews and things. But he got sick and didn't make that trip or something.
Oh.
The Dad never was called.
Hmm.
But he would have been fine.
You'd have been a great sealer, yeah. And they served there till when? Do you remember how long?
A number of years.
I just remember them being ordnance workers, and
They were quite a while. Boys, all the boys at Temple.
yeah. Well, thanks, Dad. You had good parents.
A great dad.
Incredible
blessed
parents.
Blessed with wonderful parents.
Yeah. Be fun to see him again someday. We all will. So, thanks.